Welcome to In the Black, the podcast that shines a light on resilience, transformation, and the power of reinvention. I'm Araceli, and each week, my co-host Shannon and I sit down with incredible women who have faced some of life's hardest challenges, from personal setbacks to societal obstacles, and have emerged on the other side stronger, driven, and ready to make a difference.
On In the Black, we celebrate these stories of strength and success, diving deep into the journeys of women who turned pain into purpose, adversity into action, and now dedicate themselves to making the world a better place in their own way. They're here to inspire, share hard-earned wisdom, and remind us all, no matter how dark things may seem, life is cyclical and dawn is coming. So whether you're looking for inspiration, motivation, or just a reminder that change is always possible, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to In the Black.
Today we are welcoming Michela Giordano Castro. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a trauma-informed therapist specializing in trauma recovery, eating disorders, and holistic healing. As a spirituality coach, she supports individuals in reconnecting with their inner wisdom outside of rigid religious frameworks. Raised in a conservative Christian fundamentalist community, she spent years suppressing her evolving beliefs out of fear of rejection. After a decade of spiritual disconnection, she found the courage to come out online as an ex-Christian, reclaiming her spirituality on her own terms. Today, she guides others in healing religious trauma, embracing authenticity, and exploring spirituality beyond dogma. Michela, can you take us back to your early relationship with faith? What it was like growing up in a conservative Christian fundamentalist community for you? I also grew up in a very conservative community, so I'm just really curious what that looked like for you.
Yeah. Well, some people assume differently just based on what I do, but my upbringing was largely, very positive when it came to, my experience with religion. I mean, of course, I think it's really hard to avoid any shame when it comes to, a lot of religious doctrine. So some of that was a part of my life, but for the most part, I had a very positive relationship with religion, with church. It wasn't somewhere that I necessarily had, like a lot of friends, but I really enjoyed going because it was something to do. It was something that allowed me to feel more spiritually connected, because spirituality really was my own by the time I turned like 11, or in my 11th year, it became my own. Before that, it was just, this is what my family does. And so it was just part of life. But overall, another element to my journey is that I was homeschooled for most of my schooling years. I had the public school experience as well as private school experience. And that one was in Italy with a school run by nuns. So that was interesting. But I had that extra element to it where not only, at church was I around Christians, but any kind of extracurricular activity was around Christians. We did like co-op classes. So all very, very Christian people in my circle.
That's so wild. I was homeschooled also.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
So, yeah. Okay, continue. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no. So yeah, it was a positive experience for the most part. Like while I was in it, I was happy with it. I felt like we are doing good things. We are, living life the quote unquote right way, or at least we're really trying. And honestly, for me, it was also a little bit different than some, because it wasn't like we were in one sect of religion the whole time. My dad in particular was always seeking like what is really right, what does God really want. And so things did shift. So, I mentioned briefly living in Italy. So my dad's from Sicily. For a while we lived there, and he was the pastor of the Christian church there. We moved back to America. We went back to the church we had been going to, but eventually we shifted to doing home church. And then over time, we shifted to becoming Messianic Jews. So like Jews that believe Jesus was the Messiah. And so there was, some rockiness within that, but things definitely took a turn when we went from just different elements of understanding within religion to my dad one day saying that God's not real at all and religion is just brainwashing. And that was a huge, table flipping kind of world altering moment. So that was a shift, but during the time I was very happy in it. I really wanted to remain in my Christianity even when I did begin to doubt. um, I had plans to go to a Christian university. My goal was to become a missionary. I was very happy for the most part within religion. It was my whole community, like I had mentioned. So for the most part, positive. Again, looking back, you have a clear understanding. So I see some of the challenges now. There was definitely an influence when it came to like shame around doing the right or wrong thing, shame around food, shame around my body, which is already being, fueled by society, and just this idea of when I do something wrong, I'm disobeying God or I'm hurting Jesus, I'm contributing to his suffering on the cross. It definitely added to that. So those are the negatives I can recall, but for the most part during those years, I felt positive about it.
That is crazy. Yeah. The only thing that well, there's many things, but one thing that sticks out to me as you were saying that was I grew up Catholic, and we had to, in order to get baptized, we had to take classes, and they made like such a huge ordeal, and it was so many classes and so boring and in a language that I didn't understand. Like the words were so big, and it was, and the guy who we had to sit in front of, I was like, so what if a bunny dies? Does the bunny go to heaven? And I was this little kid. And he's like, well, no, because then there would be like hundreds of little bunnies just hopping everywhere in heaven. And that would, and I was like, out. I was like, nope.
I love it. That is amazing. I've talked to people who kind of had similar experiences where early on they figured something's not right here, or this doesn't feel good, or doesn't make sense, or anything along those lines. But no, for me, it was always like, okay, this is just truth, period, because it's what my parents say is true. I did have some time of doubt when I was 11, and then I felt like I got the support I needed to come out of that, and then I was all into religion, to my Christian religion, even beyond, my parents to some degree. Like I felt like we needed to be even more religious, but so that we could be even more happy and have more peace and less conflict and all these things. I thought religion was the way to get that, the way to live, the best life, which is why I was so into it. And also why it was so hard when I lost it all.
That's so interesting. I was incredibly religious until I was probably 35.
Mm.
And so it's always fascinating to see what people's journeys are like. So you said that you wanted to go to a religious college. Did you end up going to the religious college, or did things kind of deconstruct prior to that?
So like I mentioned, my dad just kind of literally, I mean, he lived there, so he didn't literally show up, but just felt like he just showed up as an atheist one day. I remember when I understood what he was saying, I thought my ears were messed up. Like I couldn't believe it. But so that kind of started things, only because, I mean, as a therapist, I have some understanding of how the brain works. And, if everyone's always telling you this is right and everyone else is wrong, it's so hard to not just believe that's right and everything else is wrong. But then I had this strong influence, and not just influence, but presence in my life. Because my dad, again, he's Italian, he was a preacher, he likes to talk a lot and often. So I was hearing often, that this was wrong and the reasons why that he saw it to be wrong and all these things. And so I wrestled with all of that for 2 years. And it came to a point, actually, a few months before my high school graduation, where I just had to accept, like, I can't force this anymore. like I was fighting for it because it was just so much easier. I have my community, I had my school set up, I had this belief this would make life so much better. But I had to just accept, like, I can't do this anymore. And that was pretty devastating at the time. But again, school was school was already set up. And my mom had said that if I went there, she would pay for it because it's this really, strict Christian college, in Arkansas that was way more affordable than like any other full-time program. So I was like, well, I'm used to all this already and I don't have to get in debt. Like, I can't say no to this. And so yeah, I closed that, or I say I let that door close to religion because I didn't want it to close at the time. And yeah, after that summer, I moved to Arkansas to go to the university. And I was there for the whole 4 years. Um, so I was just kind of still in that environment in a way.
I'm curious, why did your dad all of a sudden, do you know why he all of a sudden just dropped his belief?
I don't remember who it was, but so one thing about him, I mean, as I mentioned, even within Christianity, we were kind of moving around, but always within Christianity, belief in God, belief in Jesus. And so, yeah, my dad, I mean, all this was the result of my dad just being very interested in learning things. So he was, always researching, watching YouTube, doing these different things, reading books. And so there was someone, I don't remember who, that made just the argument that clicked for him, but clicked to this, drastic degree. And I do believe that that element of you're being brainwashed, you know, did a lot for my dad because he very strongly does not want to be controlled or manipulated and these different things. And so whoever it was, however they presented things, really got him, on the atheism train for several months. But he actually became spiritual outside of religion after only maybe like 3 or 4 months. But by then I was like, I don't want to hear anything you have to say anymore. But he still had that dialogue of religion isn't true and all of that. And so it was 2 years that I was kind of, arguing with him, figuring things out within myself, really trying to hold on to my faith. And I eventually had to just admit, like, this isn't happening.
What were some of the internal conflicts you started to experience as you began questioning your beliefs?
Honestly, the hardest ones were these ideas that I had that made religion so attractive to me. Again, because like even within my family, I was more into it than even some of my family members and even my parents at some points. It was because I would read these books or see these people that seemed to just really radiate this love and have this peace and happiness and just seem really regulated and content. And I read about miracles and all these different things. So it was really hard for me to work with was this idea that if I don't believe in my religion, then I'm not going to feel that security that I have a path towards more happiness and peace. And I'm not going to feel the security of, knowing that God has my back and he has a plan. He's going to help me make these big decisions in life and go through these big moments in life. And so it felt really, really scary to consider letting that go and just kind of navigating life on my own, which, I mean, at this point, over 10 years later, I don't believe it has to be that way. But at the time, it was pretty black and white of it's either I keep my religion or I shut out spirituality. And I never became atheist just because there was so much I learned that I figured I don't think we can say for sure there is nothing. And so I just held that label of agnostic, but without any desire to pursue spirituality. I felt actually very repelled by spirituality because I was afraid of being tricked or getting it wrong again and going through that hurt again. And so I just stayed away from it for a really long time. But those were the hardest things for me to wrestle with. letting go of.
Yeah, I talk a lot about pendulum swings, how a lot of times before we find our balancing point, we swing all the way in a different direction. Like you said that your dad went from super religious to completely atheist and then kind of found his balance in spirituality. And I think that we as humans tend to do that a lot. Is that pendulum swing of, oh well, I don't believe this, so I'm going this direction, and then what's really true for us is somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious though, going through college at a Christian school, what did it feel like to live in the closet spiritually? Like, how did that affect your identity, your emotional well being? How did that affect how you lived your day to day life? What impact did that have on you?
Mm. So, in the beginning, I was very fearful of anyone knowing that I wasn't Christian because, I mean, we had all just gotten there. I figured, you know, everybody is Christian in here because they want to be around Christians. And, you know, this school had chapel every day, Bible every semester, all these rules to keep you modest and pure and blah, blah, blah. And so I figured everyone who's here is serious. But that turned out to not be the case. You know, I was able to meet people who weren't really religious, like they were Christian, but I mean, obviously, maybe not obviously, but, you know, with the homeschool fundamentalist kind of upbringing, even though I wasn't even Christian anymore, I still lived a lot of that out. And again, my mindset was even that the whole reason I did this to begin with was because it's the best way. And so even though I didn't believe the Bible was the word of God and, you know, all of that, I still thought, well, this is still the way to be happiest. So I still pretty much lived as that same person. However, I met people who were on a different spectrum within Christianity, you could say. And so I remember for whatever reason, I didn't open up to some of those people. The first person I opened up to was actually someone who was pursuing her ministry degree, which, you know, this was a Church of Christ university, and women are not allowed to have any position of power except like a youth minister, children's minister. So, like, that's what she was pursuing. And, you know, she was into it, obviously, with what she was pursuing. But again, she had different values, different ways of following it than I did in my upbringing. And I ended up being so scared, but deciding to tell her for whatever reason. I don't remember exactly why. And I remember her surprise because she even said, like, you're more Christian than most Christians I know. Even though I wasn't even Christian, but it was just because of, you know, all that upbringing. So I did open up to some people, you know, over time. I opened up more to some people that I became really close with there. In person, there was people that I had shared things with, but online, I was very intentional about not having anything posted that would suggest that I wasn't Christian. I'll rephrase that because I would post things that would reflect my shifting beliefs. Like, for example, the one of the first positives I found in not being Christian was feeling able to truly love and accept people in the LGBTQ community, as well as not fear that people were going to go to hell. Like, for the first at least year, I was still bitter that I lost my religion, but I felt like, well, at least I have these positives, which are big. But so I would post these things, but I would never say anything outright that I wasn't Christian or anything like that. So it was, you know, it helped to have some people that I was being open with. It was hard to feel like I needed to hide and pretend. Like, I joined like their version of a sorority, which they called a sister club because sororities aren't godly. So we had our version of it. And yeah, there were different things like that where I would feel uncomfortable. You know, I would feel that stress kind of being held in my body in these spiritual or religious kind of scenarios, knowing that I wasn't part of it, but I was acting like I was just by being there. And it wasn't authentic. It wasn't aligned. So there was a challenge there. I remember even when it came to opening up to my parents about it, with my dad, I had no problem. In fact, I wanted it to be like a slap in the face, to be honest, and him to, and it worked. He felt very bad that I was so opposed to spirituality for so long, and very happy once I, came around. But with my mom, I was very scared to tell her. I didn't want her to feel hurt. I didn't want her to feel worried. And I did end up seeing a therapist at my school. They had some counselors you could see for free. And that I did go to that for this reason, for the reason of feeling this discomfort, being a non-Christian in this Christian environment, not knowing what to do about my situation with my family when I would go home. And she did encourage me. She was obviously Christian, but she did a good job. She was accepting. She encouraged me to tell my mom, and I did. And it, wasn't easy, and it took time, but eventually, she came around and became accepting to it.
So obviously you were living this life where you were kind of afraid to tell everyone, but you had those specific few people that you were telling. What was the breaking point? What was the moment that you were like, I have to let people know that this is truly who I am, and I have to live authentically as who I really am?
It took a really long time. Again, there was a lot of fear. I mean, not only was my immediate family and my community and, up until college ended, primarily all Christian, but even my distant family, is all Christian. And I had fears around like, what are my aunts going to say? And are they going to not be comfortable with me spending time with my cousins, and like different fears like this. And so it wasn't until I became spiritual again, just outside of religion, that I became open about it and, started posting things, just kind of expressing that I'm not a Christian, versus just expressing that maybe I was some Christian with just different views than some other Christians, which there are a lot of. Christians can have all kinds of, viewpoints, but it took until then, until I just felt this desire to make it easier for others struggling with leaving religion, especially because of that pendulum that you mentioned that I also experienced in my own way, and just wanting to let other people know that you don't have to fear such a swing to the opposite side, which I was seeing so much of in these deconstruction groups and things like this. There is a way to be spiritual without religion, which initially I didn't feel was possible. I didn't feel like it would be, rational or real. And when I started experiencing that for myself, I wanted other people to know. So that was my push.
So when you say outside of religion, what does that mean?
Just over the course of, I would say, 2 years, different things happened. I learned different things. And eventually one day I was like, wow, I believe that there is a spiritual influence on life, and that there is more than just, living and dying, which before I figured there could be something, but again, I didn't care to worry about it or think about it. But it came to a point where I felt like there is, an interaction in my life that is beyond just chaos and the material. And I'm interested in this, and I want to lean into this. And so that's what I mean when I say spirituality outside of religion now.
Was there a moment in time that came to you or that happened that made you think there was a spiritual, how'd you put it?
Yeah. So, again, it was more of like an accumulation. I think when it started was, for starters, I needed personally, because I didn't know how to handle it, I just needed time. And a lot of time. So I think it was maybe around like 7 or 8 years after leaving religion that I was kind of curious, and I saw this docu-series advertisement or whatever on Netflix for a docu-series called Surviving Death. And in this docu-series, people are sharing their experiences that can't really be explained by science, and even doctors are talking about, what they saw in their patients. And so I was like, this is really weird. This is interesting. But at the same time, I didn't like dig too much into it. And then I ended up seeing a docu-series later called How to Change Your Mind. And this is a Harvard professor who's done a lot of research into psychedelics. And, as a therapist, I'm very interested into that as well, for how we're seeing the benefits for mental health. But also in the docu-series, they were talking about how many people, or some people, I don't remember the percentage, would report like the most spiritual experience of their lives on psychedelics. And I thought that was very interesting. Like, okay, this isn't being pushed by a man or a book or a doctrine. This is a plant that is leading people to have spiritual experiences. That got me intrigued. And then just over time, another factor was the internal family systems therapy modality. It's one that is shown to be really effective for trauma, as well as changing behaviors such as like eating disorders. And I received a training in it, but then I started working with an IFS therapist for myself. And it just kind of led to more reflection. And I would also say like a resonating of the fact that in IFS, it's this concept that, we do not have mono minds where we're just like thinking one way and that's it. We have what they call multi minds. So an example I like to give of this is like, part of me loves her and part of me can't stand her. Like we're dynamic. We can have contradictions within our very selves. And IFS uses that in a very helpful way to help us separate, where we have these contradictions and conflictions within ourselves. But another element of IFS is this concept that we all have what they call self energy. And self energy is compassion, courage, creativity, clarity, connection, different things like this, perspective, playfulness. There's, 8 C's and 5 P's. But all, these very all descriptors that reminded me a lot of what I knew as the Holy Spirit growing up in Christianity, and what I saw in, the ideal Christians that I wanted to be and be around, and all of that. And so, this is not religion. This is science. I mean, it's a therapeutic modality, but it is evidence-based and proven to be very effective. And it's growing so much in the therapy world. And so seeing that in here as well, there is this like continuation of some threads of truth from religion that has nothing in this area that has nothing to do with religion. That also kind of helped me lean into it more and become more interested in the idea that, maybe there was real things happening within my experiences and what I would learn in Christianity. And just because some of it isn't true or doesn't resonate with me doesn't mean that none of it, is true. So that also really struck me. And then I just started having different experiences that seemed very like synchronistic. And I came to a point where I just felt this comfort and safety with calling myself spiritual and like thinking about spiritual things, whereas before I didn't. So it was just kind of like an evolution.
I absolutely love that. I remember in college, I had a professor, because I went to a Bible college as well. And I had this one professor who said, all truth is God's truth. And and he was talking about like things that were outside of religion. And I remember being so shocked by that concept, where I was like, how can it be true if it's not in the Bible? Or how can it be? Because I was so like programmed that this is the only truth. And when he kind of said that, it kind of opened up a little bit more doors. And then I ended up living with two women from Palestine and Egypt over the 2 summers, and just learning about their religion, and that kind of opened up my eyes just a little bit more. I stayed religious, like I said, I stayed in the Christian religion until I was 35. Um, but it gave me these different experiences that kind of opened my eyes a little bit more. And when you talked about the fruits of the spirit, my brain is now singing the song and I can't get it to stop.
Yeah, no, and I can never remember them, but I just knew it felt the same, the fruits of the spirit to the 8 C's and 5 P's of self. And so it was like, maybe they're really connecting to something and this is real. And so, yeah, that was a big bridge for me as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I literally have the song in my head. It's like love, joy, peace, and patience, kindness, goodness. Um, okay, sorry, I'm digressing. Um, so I'm going to dive into more of the therapy and spirituality side of things. Um, what ways do you see people silence parts of their identity out of fear, spiritually, emotionally, socially? What do you see as a therapist very frequent?
Hmm, that's a good question. Honestly, in my work, it's not one particular area or topic. It's really just a matter of really what I see a lot of is within, family structures, if family is not accepting of a certain quality or characteristic, people tend to struggle with being open about that. And even if they're open as in the sense of like, I've said that this is true about me, or maybe I post about this topic, difficulty in expressing that, in person around family members seems to be the biggest challenge that I've seen.
What advice would you give to someone who feels spiritually numb or lost but isn't sure how to reconnect?
Mm. Yeah, my advice would be to get curious about what's there, because if we're experiencing numbness, that's kind of like a way of dissociation. It's a protective mechanism. So is anger. Whether we're really angry or really numb, those are both signs that we have a part, if we're using IFS language, that is trying to protect us from some sort of painful emotion. And I get that. I dealt with the anger for a long time, and that's what took me so long to reconnect spirituality, as well as just become more free. Even if, let's say, there's a person who knows they definitely don't want to ever go along with anything that's not proven by science. There are those people out there, and there's even those people out there who have their version of spirituality within that. Spirituality doesn't have to involve faith. It can also be just a way of living life with practicing different practices that lead to more connection, more awe in life, more purpose in life, and you can find your own way of going about that. But my advice would be to let yourself feel those feelings. And so many of us don't know how to do that. We feel so overcome and overwhelmed by our feelings that we avoid them or we try to distract from them. And this has been so helpful for me to learn too, is that there is a way to literally just feel your feelings, and it allows it to process and digest and dissolve and run its course way faster than if we're ignoring them or distracting, or if we're feeding them. So a lot of times we think we're feeling our feelings, but really we're stuck in our head. We're thinking about the problem, we're thinking about what happened, we're thinking about what might happen later. And the difference is getting into your body. So getting curious about your body, letting that pain be there, know it's only going to be temporary. And breathing is really helpful with this, both in keeping, the pain from going way out of hand, as well as helping that energy, process and dissolve the energy of the emotion. One saying is like emotion is energy in motion, and we want to keep it in motion to run its course. So yeah, I would encourage them to be curious about their body, really try to let themselves feel, let themselves think and process too, but in a way that's constructive. Maybe some journaling, maybe talking to someone that's supportive and isn't going to push them one way or the other, maybe working with a coach. But definitely letting yourself feel in your body while breathing to process, and that's going to be a way forward, whichever way you want to take that.
You had written us and had mentioned what was it? Not throw the baby out of the bathwater. So, can you talk about the idea of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater? What does that mean in practice?
Yeah. So this is what I did. I threw the baby out with the bathwater. I recognized I can't believe religion, and so many people are experiencing this. I mean, religion, specifically Christianity, because this is the biggest religion in our nation. We're seeing in the research and the statistics that it's declining at a rapid pace. And so many people I see, just throw out spirituality entirely with it. They say, this is false. I was lied to. I was tricked. I lost these years of my life. And so, people get angry and they don't want to be disillusioned and they throw the baby out with the bathwater. So letting go of spirituality as a whole and letting go of religion is what I'm referring to there. And not throwing the baby out with the bathwater involves, taking our time, as I'm mentioning, letting ourselves feel, letting ourselves process. It's not an easy shift, if you've been, really living this as truth, or it's just been all or, it's a hard transition. So letting yourself get through that transition of, finding your footing, letting yourself feel and process, but recognizing any knee jerk reactions of wanting to throw it all out, and just kind of pausing. And when you're ready, reflecting on what was really significant for me in my experience of religion. Some people never really feel anything personal. It's more of just like a cultural practice. And if so, that's fine. And maybe there could be something deeper that you'll find within spirituality outside of religion if you want to pursue that. But, if you have had something that felt really impactful or that resonated with you within your time in religion, looking at that and looking at, is there a way to hold on to this, or could there be truth in this, even if you don't believe, let's say, like that the Bible is the word of God anymore and this is the only way to live. So not throwing out the baby with the bathwater is finding a way to live spirituality in a way that's authentic to you, even if you're not following this, group think approach with the doctrine and all the other gist that comes with that.
And by the way, back to the bunny story, how it was silly that they'd be in heaven. When I said I was like out, I meant Catholic wise. I was just like, this is, but I still believed in God, and I
Mhm.
still believe in God to this day. I just, I, I don't agree with a lot of how people who call themselves Christian and go to church act and behave. Um, where they shun people or they gossip about people or they judge people. I think, God wants us to be loving and, be accepting of everyone and just show love and kindness and acceptance because, you know, everybody needs a warm hug all the time. And that's what you need to walk around with, just this warmth about you. And, that's going to bring people closer to God and the spirituality that exists around us.
Yeah, I agree.
Beautiful. I feel like an hour is never long enough with people. I could just interview you forever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to learn more about what you do. So if you could just talk to us about kind of what you're doing now and how you're helping people and that sort of thing, that would be great.
Yeah. So, right now I'm just trying to just put my story out there, let people know that, there is this other way of going about it. When I was deconstructing is a word really popular for, figuring out what you really believe when it comes to religion. And sometimes that does lead to people, retaining the label of Christianity, or the title, however you want to put it. But, I've discovered there are many deconstruction related groups, like on Facebook, for example, and even different pages online. And I see so many people, on that other end of the pendulum swing, just kind of throwing out spirituality in entirety. And so for myself, not having known anyone who left religion, but had a spirituality that didn't seem, like another end of the pool, another level of being in the deep end, in another sense. I want to put my story out there just to kind of let people know that you can leave religion. A lot of people are already on that path and just terrified, like I was. And you can keep going, and it can be beautiful, and you can still be spiritual and have an even more beautiful spirituality potentially than you ever experienced before. And I also want to use my training and my knowledge as a therapist. Therapy technically is for clinically significant disorders and symptoms that cause clinically significant dysregulation to your life. And so people can see a therapist for this. And I am licensed in Texas, but beyond that, I want to help people in more like a coaching role with this specific topic, because often it's not to that level that it's causing such a dysregulation in your ability to function, but it is creating a lot of internal pain and struggle. And so I also offer coaching services to kind of help people have a safe place to work through their doubts, to learn how to feel to heal in a healthy way and process what they're going through. And then explore what they want spirituality to be going forward. And I share resources of all the things that I'm learning, but also in a way that just kind of totally opens the door and lays out the stage for them to make their own choices and go about it in a way that feels authentic to them.
Awesome.
All right, so this is the question that we always close with. Being in the red is where you're in a negative or an inauthentic state in your life, and being in the black is turning that around and creating something positive. So when you look at your own life and your journey, what does being in the black mean for you?
I feel like a hit of emotion with that question, because I've thought about this some already, but I mean, truthfully, although in my 10 years of agnosticism, I really was fine. Like, I wasn't suffering big time with any substances or mental health issues or anything. I mean, yeah, I had my struggles, but it wasn't like I was off the deep end in my suffering by any means. And yet, having reconnected to spirituality, I feel so much more whole, so much more in the black, as y'all are describing. And I didn't even realize, what I was missing. I mean, in a way, that's what I was fearing leaving religion, was being in the red. And I think I was just so stubborn that I didn't want that to be true, that I did a pretty good job of, feeling like I was in the black, but having spirituality back, but even without religion, has made it even richer and stronger. And that has really led to me feeling this sense of peace and wholeness that I didn't have before, even though I stubbornly didn't want that to be true. I wanted to think that I didn't need spirituality, and we don't need it, but I really believe that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and allowing ourselves to lean into that. It's not easy for a lot of people. There can be a lot of fear around it, but when we allow ourselves to do that, life does become richer, which is another reason why I'm passionate about this work.
I love that. And where can our listeners find your passion about this work? Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so I create content on most platforms. So on YouTube and currently on TikTok, my username on both is Michela's Mind Munchies. All put together. I may be changing the TikTok to Michela Giordano Castro, which is my name on Instagram as well as Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed. I feel like we should have had part one and part two with you.
Yes, I could dive into the shame and the guilt and all of that for a long time. I think that getting away from that aspect of religion and spirituality was so life changing for me and so freeing. And I would love to dive in with you on that. Our list is backed up pretty far, but if we do get back to it an opportunity to interview you again, I would love to have a deep dive into that for the
Yeah.
next one. But thank you so much for being on here. We so appreciate you taking time out to come and talk to everyone. And I am very much looking forward to just finding you and following you. So
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of In the Black. I hope today's story left you feeling inspired and reminded of the incredible strength that lies in each of us. Our guest today has taken her toughest challenges and transformed them into something beautiful, reminding us all that even in the darkest moments, there's always a way to find light in the world.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe and share In the Black with another woman who could use a little encouragement. Together, we're building a community of passion, purpose, and power. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and remember, your story matters. Your choices change things, and being your most authentic self can and will change the world around you.